Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation on end-to-end process automation with the Power Platform. And thank you for DynamicsCon for having me along to present this today. What I'm going to be talking about is the Power Platform and how it has multiple different components. And what you can do is pull them all together to automate a process from end to end. And I'll be doing this through a use case and an example that I think everyone will be familiar with. And I'll show an example of how I've built a solution to automate this process. So before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hamish Sheild. I am from New Zealand and I've been involved in the Dynamics 365 consulting space for over 10 years. I've recently started my own company called Apprising, and we focus on helping customers digitally innovate with the Power Platform, and also a process or an approach called design thinking. And design thinking brings out the human element of digital innovation, and with that, with the Power Platform, it's a very, very powerful combination. But enough about me and Apprising. We'll get into the presentation. So at the moment, there's a few studies out there around how companies need to digitally innovate and transform. And there's a lot of opportunity around automating processes. And then we've got the Power Platform thrown into the mix, which is about helping people who are citizen developers or people who are not coders or are not technical consultants to be able to to build their own solutions. And so with this becomes another opportunity to try tackle this kind of 50% of the tasks that are automatable in businesses, and have people who work within the business to be able to automate their own solutions. And so what I want to be able to do today is show you how you can create an end-to-end process and automate it without writing any code. And so I talked previously about the Power Platform built up all these different components, and so I'm just going to share with you what we're going to use today as part of our solution. So the first thing is robotic process automation, which is a key component of Power Automate, and that allows you to interact with systems that do not have APIs, for example. We're going to use artificial intelligence, which comes with AI Builder as part of the Power Platform, and also the common data service. So that's the underlying data platform behind the Power Platform itself. We're also going to look at how we can use the Power Platform with other Microsoft services. So we're going to be using Adaptive Cards and Microsoft Teams. We are going to also be looking at building your own connectors. So how do you connect the Power Platform to services where there are not connectors, or other applications that you want to connect your Power Platform to. And then finally, we'll take a look at Power Automate, which is going to basically tie all of this together and tie all the components so we can get that end-to-end process. So today, my scenario is invoices and expenses, and I'm talking about the invoices that you receive as a business and the expenses that your employees incur as part of doing their job. So not the invoices that you send to your customers to get payment. And so no one likes to incur expenses, but even more equally, people don't like to go through that process of scanning receipts and downloading invoices, putting them into a system. It's all very manual at the moment, email approvals, those sorts of things. And so this is going to be the scenario today, which I know a lot of people are familiar with, and people really do hate this sort of process. So a great one as an example to put automation around. So let's start with a scenario where we have an organization, and an organization has employees, it has products and services that it delivers. And so all of these things incur costs to be able to run all this. And so your employees will have some expenses in terms of things like flights and meals and parking and travel, that sort of thing. And within your business, it's things like your electricity, your buildings, pay for training, security, those sorts of things. So for a large organization, there is a lot of information and data to process around invoices and expenses. And so usually what happens with this is it gets funneled into an approval process where a select few people from the organisation, so the managers, get to approve the expenses or invoices. It then goes into, say, a finance or an admin team to then manually enter those invoices or receipts into a finance system. And so there is a massive opportunity here, especially for large organizations, to try automate all of this. But if you look at this diagram, it's quite overwhelming in terms of there's just so much going on. How do you know where to start? And so if we simplify this right down in terms of when you're starting with the Power Platform and starting to automate a process, let's just start with a really simple use case, and then we'll scale out from there. So what I'm going to do today is show you how I've got a process for this single use case here, which is around an employee parks their car. They have a car parking receipt or invoice. Their invoice is actually held on a website they need to download. They then key that information into, we're using project service automation, so that expense is then they'll be charged onto the customer and then also put against the project. It goes through an approval process, and then it's picked up by the finance team to put into the finance system. And so, typically this is a pretty manual process. The user or the employee is so manually downloading stuff, they're keying in information, they're uploading documents, they're sending out emails for approvals, that sort of thing. So let's look at how can we automate this process. And so let's kind of go back to what our Power Platform components were or are. And so the first thing is we can use robotic process automation to log into the website and download the invoice automatically and save it into a folder on someone's machine. We can then use AI Builder to scan that invoice. If it's a PDF, scan the document and pull out the invoice details. And then with Power Automate and the Common Data Service, we can take the details that AI Builder has extracted and put those into the Common Data Service, or in this instance, we've got the Project Service Automation app sitting on top of the Common Data Service. And then for approvals, we can use adaptive cards inside of Microsoft Teams. So this is kind of the interface where the manager will approve the expenses, and it's simple as chatting with someone in Microsoft Teams through adaptive cards. And then finally, we want to get this information into a system that it's not a Microsoft system, it's not Common Data Service. We want to put the invoice or the expenses into Xero, and so we can do this through a custom connector. And so what I'm going to do now is show you how we put this all together, and we'll start off with a demo of what it looks like from the user's perspective, and then I'll have a demo of how you put that all together. So from a user, if we go back to the slide here, I'm talking about a user in terms of the employee that's submitting the expense, and then also the people who are approving the expense. The first thing we want to do is download the invoice from the website. And so I'm going to simulate what that would have looked like through RPA. And I'm going to just take this invoice and put it into my expenses folder, which is then going to kind of kick off this process. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Microsoft Teams. And here, basically what will happen is the invoice is being read by AI at the moment. It's going through a flow. And soon I will get a message here to pop up and to take some action on the invoice. Okay, so now our flow bot has sent an adaptive card back to me, as this time I'm kind of wearing the employee's hat. And it's basically said, we've got an expense for review. So this is the expense that the robotic process automation has gone onto the website and downloaded the invoice. And it's extracted the details with AI Builder and presented it to me here as user in Teams. And the nice thing about having it in Teams is that I could be out on the road, I could be on my phone, and I can come in and integrate this adaptive card. So basically what this card is doing is showing me all the details of the invoice. And then I've got to tell the system whether or not this should be an internal expense, or a customer expense, so it's charged onto the customer project. So I'm just going to simply click internal expense and submit. And so from the point of view of the person who's submitting the expense, all they had to do was click a couple of buttons inside Microsoft Teams, inside an adaptive card. And so now if we kind of switch through to the point of view of the approver, I've now had a new message pop up, and let's pretend I'm a completely different person now. I'm in a different Teams channel, but I'm the approver, and I've got an approvals card here. And so basically it said, Hamish Sheild has submitted an expense and it needs to be approved. So again, we've got the details that AI Builder has read from the invoice, and I need to approve it. So again, I could be out outside of the office on my phone, and I can just click into Teams and click approve and give a comment if I want and submit. And so now this has gone through, and what we're essentially doing is using these adaptive cards to go and update project service automation, or the common data service, and then the rest of the flow is going to continue on and put all of this information into Xero. So what I'm going to show you now is how we actually build this solution and how we tie all these components together to build, the end-to-end process. And so what I've got here is I've got my Power Apps environment, and I've got a list of flows, or Power Automate flows, sorry, in the solution. And basically what I've done here is split it all out so that the flows can all kind of tie together one after the other. But the reason for splitting them out is that at the moment we are automating kind of one use case of an invoice process, and to be able to scale out, it's definitely a lot easier to have these split out, and so we can update individual components as we start scaling out the solution. So let's kind of jump in and take a look at each of these flows and how they work. So the first one is starting to process the invoices, and so what I've got this doing is it's triggering manually with a button, but what you could do is also have this set up so that it runs once a month or on a schedule. And what this is doing is all it's going to do is run a UI flow which logs into a website and downloads an invoice. So for this part of the demo, I've got a little video to show, and I'm going to run that now. And so when you run the flow, what it does is it opens up a browser here. So you can see it's opening up Edge. And so now it's accessing the website. So this is all stuff I've pre-recorded, and now it's going to run this over and over again. And so it's going to put in my login details, log me into the website automatically. I'm not touching anything here at the moment. Finds my invoice for the month, downloads it, and then it ends up in my downloads folder on my machine. So that's kind of the end of that flow. It's now sitting in my downloads folder. So the next part of the flow is I've got a flow that accesses my downloads folder, and when a new file is added, it basically grabs that invoice and then copies it through to my expenses folder on OneDrive. So that's what you saw me do when I dragged and dropped that invoice into the expenses folder. That kind of kicks off the rest of the process. And so what I'm doing here is Power Automate in the Microsoft Cloud needs a way to talk to my downloads folder on my machine. And so as part of this, I've installed the gateway that allows us to connect our on-premise information to the cloud, and that kind of uses this this trigger here around monitoring the folder. So all this does is goes through and moves it into OneDrive, so moving the invoice up to the cloud. The third flow then monitors the expenses folder and basically triggers when a file is created. And so once a file is created, then we're running AI Builder, and we're running this kind of predict action to go scan the invoice and get the details from it. And once it's got all the details, it basically comes through and creates this new expense record in Project Service Automation. So what I'm going to do now is just have a quick look at kind of what that AI Builder model looks like. So here is my trained model, and I've got it's specifically for this is the Auckland Transport parking invoice, and I'm going to do a quick test on this, and I'm going to go and quickly grab my invoice from there, pop it in there. Cool. And so this is basically I'm going to show you, what it does in terms of reading the information out of the document. So I'm just doing a quick test of the model to make sure it works. And so what I've done to train this model is give it 5 different copies of Auckland Transport receipts or invoices, and I've trained it to read this table here. So in a month, if you park multiple times in a month, you're going to have multiple lines in this table. So I'm able to smart enough to know this is a table and extract multiple rows or multiple times you've parked, which is it's a really handy thing to do when you're dealing with an invoice with multiple line items. So I'm extracting the whole entire table, and I'm going to be using that in my Power Automate flow, and I'm also extracting the total amount of the invoice, so we can use that. And so the things that I'm using for putting into the common data service or process or service automation are the date, the amount, and description of where I parked. So here I parked on Short Street. So that's how AI Builder reads the information, and it passes it back to the flow. And then my flow, if I refresh this, has created this whole bunch of test records here, but basically it's created that expense record in PSA from the information that it's read. So it's got the date, where I parked, and the amount. Okay, so the next part in the flow then, so once that expense record is then created in Project Service Automation, I want to present that adaptive card to the person who's claiming the expense, so they can tag whether or not it's an internal expense or for a customer. And so in this flow, we're using a thing called post an adaptive card to Teams, and you've got to put in some quite sort of serious JSON text into here, and it looks quite daunting in terms of if you're not, this is meant to be a low code solution, right? So if you're not a developer, then how are you going to work around this? So with adaptive cards, there is a really good website called adaptivecards.io. And so basically what adaptive cards are basically a way of kind of delivering a user interface in a uniform way across many different channels. And so you can have an adaptive card inside an email and Outlook, you can have it in Teams, you could have it on a web chat, on your website, you can put them even into Cortana as well. So adaptive cards are a really, I guess, quite a nice way of having a uniform way of interacting with, with people. So as part of the adaptive cards here, there's a thing called Designer, and this is what helps you generate all that JSON text. And so here, this tool is quite comprehensive. There's a whole lot of things you can do. We can say, well, let's first of all just select the host I'm hosting in. So I'm going to host this in Microsoft Teams, the light version. So now I get kind of a Teams view of what this card will look like. And then when you start a card, you can say, let's start a new card, but I want to start from a template because I want something that's quite similar. So we could say, for example, there's actually a really complex expense approval card down here, and that puts it into a template. And then we can start, say, selecting elements, and we've got a whole bunch of settings over here which we can change, which updates the card. And then at the end, we get this, what we call a card payload, which is all of the text we want to put into the flow. So I'll go back to our flow, and let's just have a look at all of this. I'll click all this text here, and I'm going to select all of this, delete it, and put my payload into here. So now we can see a preview of what our card looks like as an adaptive card within Teams. And so you can use the configuration here to configure all of your text and everything to then get the right input to post and to put into your action in Power Automate. That's it there. And so basically what this step is doing is it's waiting, it's going to post the card and wait for a response from the user. And once they respond, I'm going to update the expense in project service automation to be submitted. The next part of the flow is one that triggers when a expense record has been submitted. Then we've got to create an approval. And so embedded into Power Automate is an action or a connector called approvals, and it basically allows you to easily set up approvals either through email or through Teams and post it as an adaptive card. And so for this one here, we can see that I'm going to post the approval as an adaptive card, but they've simplified this whole process where you don't have to go design your own card. The card is already designed for you, and you just need to say, I want to send the approvals a card, and Power Automate does the rest and figures it all out. Similar to the last process, it waits for the approval, so the person to interact with it through Microsoft Teams. And then once approved, we set the status to be approved in Project Service Automation. And then the final step is once that's approved, then I've got a custom connector here which goes and creates that invoice inside of Xero. So basically what we've got here is with all these flows and all these components combined together, we've got a complete end-to-end automation of the process, and really all the users have to do is interact with those adaptive cards on Microsoft Teams, which is a whole lot better than having to deal with uploading and downloading documents, keying in information, sending out emails, all of those sorts of things. So if we return back to our presentation here, we've come to a point where we've now got a solution for just one part of that of an invoicing process. It's one kind of scenario, right? But which is this one here. But this is not really going to add a lot of value to a business. It's quite a bit of setup to get this up and running. And if a person only parks a couple of times a month or whatever, there's probably not a lot of value in there. But if we can then come back to the scenario where the whole organization is submitting expenses, and we can automate it for all the employees and all the expenses and all the invoices that come in to the organization, then we're going to be adding real value to it. So the scenario I've shown you today is an example of how you can put the components together. When you start scaling out, you're probably going to do it in different ways. You're probably not going to flick out, say, an adaptive card for every single time that an expense needs to be approved. You may group them together and do a card with a whole bunch of expenses to approve at once. So you need to kind of plan that out and think about it. But I think what I've shown you today is you've got, I guess, the bones, and I guess you can see what's possible with the platform and combining all these components together. To help further with the scaling of things, Microsoft have got a solution called the AI Builder Invoice Processing Automation Starter Kit. And so basically what that does is it allows you to set up a system where you can monitor, it's based on emails and invoices coming in by email, and it can determine which type of invoice it is, put the right AI model against it, and then go throughout the rest of the process in terms of you can put it into the common data service or PSA or whatever you want to do with it. And so that looks something like this. It's basically a Canvas Power App that takes your invoice and your finance administrator would use this app to review the invoice. They can actually come in here and change amounts and change things, say if AI Builder hadn't read the invoice correctly. But quite a nice way of kind of quickly validating that AI Builder's got it right and processing through the information. So definitely take a look at that starter kit. It's probably a really good starting point for scaling out a solution like this. A new thing that's coming up as part of the what's out in preview at the moment, actually, but this was announced as part of the release wave 1 for this year for the Power Platform, is receipt scanning. So that's the ability to be able to take have a Power app on your phone. You take a photo of a receipt, it scans the details, and then you can use Power Automate again to do what you want with that information. Put it into Project Service, put it into Xero, or whatever. But that's a more, I guess, a generic solution, and is meant to work across any type of invoice, of receipt. And whereas the solution I showed you with the AO Builder reading the invoice, each different type of invoice, you've got to retrain the model. And so that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm going to leave you with a few references here. Hopefully, the aim of this presentation was to inspire you to create your own solutions, and for me to show you what the art of the possible was. So go through and click through these links to find more detail about how you build each of those components, because I know the session's been very high level. Thank you for coming along today. I also like to thank DynamicsCon as well for having me. It's been a really great experience working with them, and all the best with your automation with the Power Platform.